At my wedding, my mom whispered something that would haunt me forever. I'm Amber, and I need to tell you about the most beautiful day of my life that turned into my worst nightmare. You see, every little girl dreams of her perfect wedding day, right? The white dress, the flowers, the man of her dreams waiting at the altar. Well, I had all of that. Or at least, I thought I did. It was October 15th, a crisp autumn day with golden leaves dancing in the breeze. The venue was perfect, a charming little chapel surrounded by oak trees that my fiancé David and I had fallen in love with the moment we saw it. Everything was exactly as I'd imagined since I was 7 years old, playing dress-up in my grandmother's old curtains, pretending they were wedding veils. David looked so handsome standing there, in his navy suit, his eyes sparkling with what I believed was pure love and excitement. We'd been together for 3 years, and I was absolutely certain he was my soulmate. He was kind, successful, and most importantly, he made me laugh every single day. What more could a girl ask for? The ceremony was going perfectly. I walked down the aisle to Canon in D, feeling like a princess. My dad squeezed my hand before placing it in David's, and I could see tears of joy in his eyes. My bridesmaids, my sister Sarah, and my 2 best friends from college looked radiant in their dusty rose dresses. The photographer was capturing every magical moment. But then I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat, and not in a good way. My mom wasn't smiling. Now, you have to understand something about my mother, Linda. She's always been the life of the party, the woman who cries at commercial about puppies, the one who gets more excited about other people's good news than they do themselves. She'd been planning my wedding with me for months, obsessing over every detail, from the centerpieces to the menu. She should have been beaming with pride. Instead, she sat in the front row looking like she was at a funeral. I tried to push the thought away. Maybe she was just emotional, I told myself. Maybe she was sad about her little girl growing up. That had to be it, right? The ceremony continued, and when David and I exchanged vows, I forgot all about my mom's strange expression. His words were so beautiful, so heartfelt. He promised to love me through sickness and health, through good times and bad, to be my partner and my best friend for the rest of our lives. When he slipped that ring on my finger, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. "You may kiss the bride," the pastor announced, and David lifted my veil with such tenderness. The kiss was perfect, soft, sweet, filled with promise. The whole chapel erupted in applause and cheers. We practically floated back down the aisle as husband and wife. I was Mrs. David Chen now, and I couldn't stop smiling. This was it, the beginning of our happily ever after. The reception was held in the chapel's adjoining hall, decorated with fairy lights and autumn flowers. Everything was magical. David and I had our first dance to At Last by Etta James, and I melted into his arms, feeling like we were the only 2 people in the world. But as the evening wore on, I kept catching glimpses of my mom. She was going through the motions, talking to guests, helping serve cake, posing for pictures, but something was off. There was a tension in her shoulders, a forced quality to her smile that only a daughter would notice. During the bouquet toss, she stood at the very back of the group of women, barely participating. When I threw my bouquet and it landed right in my cousin Jessica's hands, everyone cheered, except my mom. She just stood there, arms crossed, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. I was starting to get worried. Had David and I done something to upset her? Had there been some family drama I wasn't aware of? The moment that changed everything happened during the cake cutting. David and I were posing for photos, laughing as we fed each other bites of our 3-tiered vanilla cake with raspberry filling. It should have been one of those perfect Instagram-worthy moments. That's when my mom appeared beside me. She leaned in, So close, I could smell her familiar perfume, the same white shoulders she'd worn for as long as I can remember. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her words cut through me like a knife. "You'll regret this marriage." I nearly choked on my cake. "What?" I whispered back, hoping I'd misheard her. She looked directly into my eyes, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was pity. Pure, heartbreaking pity. "You'll regret this marriage," she repeated, even softer this time. Then she straightened up, put on that fake smile again, and walked away like nothing had happened. I stood there frozen, still holding my fork, with frosting on my lips and my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Did my own mother really just tell me I'd regret marrying the love of my life? On my wedding day? What kind of mother does that? I tried to shake it off. Maybe she'd had too much champagne. Maybe she was just struggling with empty nest syndrome. There had to be a reasonable explanation. But for the rest of the reception, those words echoed in my head. "You'll regret this marriage." Why would she say that? What did she know that I didn't? I watched David more carefully for the rest of the night. Was there something I'd missed? Some red flag I'd been blind to? He seemed like the same loving, attentive man I'd fallen for. He danced with my grandmother, made my dad laugh with his terrible dad jokes, and held my hand every chance he got. So why did my mom look at him like he was some kind of threat? The rest of the reception passed in a blur. We cut the cake, tossed the garter, said goodbye to our guests. David's college friends had tied cans to the back of his car and written "Just Married" on the rear window in washable paint. We climbed in, waved goodbye to everyone, and drove off into the night toward our hotel. But even as David held my hand while driving, telling me how perfect everything had been, how beautiful I looked, how happy he was to be my husband, I couldn't stop thinking about my mom's words. And here's the thing that's been keeping me awake at night. Because if you hit that like button and subscribe to hear the rest of the story, you'll understand why my mom's warning was about to become my worst nightmare. Because what happened 5 days later proved that sometimes a mother's instincts are more terrifying than we could ever imagine. You see, David and I spent our wedding night in the most romantic suite at the Grand Plaza Hotel. We ordered room service, drank champagne, and talked about our future until the early morning hours. He was already making plans for our honeymoon in Hawaii the following month, talking about the house we'd buy, the kids we'd have. Everything seemed perfect. But I couldn't shake the image of my mom's face, the way she looked at me with such sadness. It was like she was mourning something that hadn't even happened yet. The next morning, we headed home to our apartment to open wedding gifts and start our new life together. David was in such a good mood, humming as he made coffee, kissing my forehead every time he walked past me. He was acting like the perfect newlywed husband. So why did I feel like something was wrong? On Tuesday, our second day as husband and wife, I decided to call my mom. I needed to know what she'd meant. I needed to understand why she'd said those horrible words on what should have been the happiest day of my life. But when I called, she didn't answer. I tried again an hour later, then again that evening. Nothing. Wednesday, same thing. Thursday, I started to panic. My mom always answered my calls. Always. Even when she was at work, she'd at least text me back within a few hours. By Thursday night, I was frantic. David tried to calm me down, suggesting that maybe she just needed some time to adjust to the idea of me being married. "You know how mothers are," he said. "She's probably just emotional about losing her little girl." But that didn't feel right. My mom wasn't the type to sulk or give me the silent treatment. Even when we'd argued during my teenage years, she'd never gone more than a day without talking to me. Friday morning, exactly 5 days after my wedding, I decided to drive over to her house. I had to know she was okay, and I had to get answers about what she'd meant. I wish I'd never gone there. I wish I'd listened to that little voice in my head that was screaming at me to turn around. Because what I found at my mother's house that day changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband, and my entire life. The front door was unlocked, which was strange. My mom was paranoid about home security and never left her door unlocked, even when she was home. I called out as I stepped inside. "Mom, are you here?" Silence. I walked through the living room calling her name. Everything looked normal. Her reading glasses on the coffee table next to her latest romance novel, her favorite mug still sitting. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely turn the basement door handle. My mom's voice was getting weaker, more desperate. "Amber, is that you? Please, help me." I yanked the door open and flipped on the light switch. The basement stairs stretched down into shadows, and I could hear my mom somewhere at the bottom, but I couldn't see her. "Mom, I'm coming," I called out, taking the stairs 2 at a time. What I found down there will be burned into my memory forever. My mother was tied to a chair in the far corner of the basement, duct tape over her mouth, her eyes wide open with terror and relief when she saw me. She'd been knocking her chair against the concrete wall. That was the thudding sound I'd heard. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing the makeshift campsite set up in the opposite corner. A sleeping bag, empty food containers, a laptop, and stacks of photographs scattered across a folding table. Someone had been living in my mother's basement. I rushed to my mom, my fingers fumbling with the ropes around her wrists. "Mom, oh my God, what happened to you? Who did this to you?" When I pulled the tape from her mouth, she gasped and immediately started crying. "Amber, you have to get out of here. You have to get away from him." "From who, Mom? What are you talking about?" She looked toward the table with those photographs, and her face went pale. "Look at those pictures, Amber. Look at them." With my mom still tied to the chair, I walked over to the table, my heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. What I saw there made me sink to my knees. Hundreds of photographs, all of me. Pictures of me leaving for work, getting coffee at my favorite cafe, grocery shopping, walking in the park. Pictures taken through windows of me in my apartment, getting dressed, brushing my teeth, sleeping. Someone had been stalking me for months, maybe years. "Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Who took these?" But before she could answer, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps upstairs. The front door opening. A familiar voice calling out, "Linda, I brought your medication, like you asked." David's voice. My husband was in my mother's house? I looked at my mom, and the terror in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. "He's been living here," she whispered urgently as I worked on the ropes around her ankles. "He told me he was helping with wedding planning, coming by to discuss surprises for you. But then he started showing up at all hours, letting himself in, making himself at home." What? I couldn't process what she was telling me. David he couldn't. "The night before your wedding," she continued, her voice getting stronger with urgency, "I told him I was going to tell you everything. That's when he..." He tied me up down here. He said he'd kill me if I ruined your wedding day." The footsteps upstairs were getting closer to the basement door. "Amber, honey, he's not who you think he is. Those pictures, some of them are from before you even met him. He's been watching you for years. He orchestrated your entire relationship." My mind was reeling. The man I'd married 5 days ago, the man I thought was my soulmate, had been stalking me and holding my mother prisoner? "Linda?" David's voice was now closer, right at the top of the stairs. "I thought I heard voices." My mom's eyes went wide with panic. "Hide," she mouthed silently. But it was too late. I could hear his footsteps on the stairs. I ducked behind some storage boxes just as David came into view. He was carrying a grocery bag and wearing that same charming smile that had made me fall in love with him. "There you are, Linda. I brought your heart medication and some soup for—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the empty chair, the cut ropes on the floor. His whole demeanor changed in an instant. The smile vanished, and his eyes went cold and calculating as he scanned the basement. "I know you're down here, Amber. There's no point hiding." I held my breath, pressing myself against the concrete wall behind the boxes. "You know, I really didn't want it to happen this way," he continued, his voice eerily calm. "I had such beautiful plans for us. We were going to be so happy together." He walked over to the table with all the photographs and ran his fingers over them lovingly. "Do you see how long I've loved you? How carefully I planned everything? Our first meeting at the coffee shop wasn't an accident, sweetheart. I knew you went there every Tuesday at 2 p.m. I knew you always ordered a vanilla latte with an extra shot. I knew you dropped your textbook, so I made sure to be there to pick it up for you." My stomach lurched as I remembered that day 3 years ago, the day I'd met my future husband, the day I thought was fate bringing us together. It had all been a lie. "I learned everything about you first," David continued, still looking at the photographs. "Your favorite foods, your favorite movies, your dreams, your fears. I made myself into the perfect man for you, and it worked, didn't it? You fell in love with me so easily." I could see my mom huddled in the corner where she had managed to crawl after I had untied her. She was trying to stay quiet, but I could see she was hurt. "The only problem was your mother," David said, his voice hardening. "She started getting suspicious after our engagement, asking too many questions, noticing that I knew things about you that you'd never told me." He kicked the empty chair across the floor, and the sound made me jump. "I tried to be patient with her, I really did. But when she threatened to tell you the truth, well, I couldn't let her destroy what we have, could I?" "David," my mom spoke up from her corner, her voice steady despite everything, "this isn't love. What you've done to my daughter, what you're doing now, this is sick." He turned toward her, and I saw him pull something from his jacket pocket. A knife. "You should have kept your mouth shut, Linda. We could have all been one big happy family. You could have watched your grandchildren grow up." I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let him hurt my mom. I looked around desperately and spotted an old baseball bat my dad had left down there years ago. "But instead," David continued, walking toward my mom, "you had to be difficult. You had to try to ruin everything." That's when I made my move. I grabbed the bat and stood up from behind the boxes. "Get away from her!"
He spun around, and for a split second, I saw genuine surprise on his face. Then that cold smile returned. "There's my beautiful bride," he said softly. "You look upset, sweetheart. This must be a lot to process." "You're insane," I whispered, gripping the bat tighter. "You've been stalking me, lying to me, holding my mother prisoner?" I prefer to think of it as loving you completely. Most people don't understand real love, Amber. They settle for shallow connections, surface-level relationships. But what we have is deeper than that. "What we have is nothing," I screamed. "It's all built on lies." His face darkened. "Don't say that. Everything I did for us, for our love." "That's not love, David. That's possession." He was getting closer, and I could see the knife glinting in the basement light. "You'll understand eventually," he said quietly. "After we get through this rough patch, after we deal with your mother's interference, we'll go away together, start fresh somewhere new. You'll see that I'm the only one who truly loves you." "I will never go anywhere with you," I said firmly. "Our marriage is over." Something snapped in his eyes when I said that. The mask he had been wearing for 3 years completely fell away, and I saw the real David for the first time. He wasn't the charming, loving man I'd married. He was a predator, and
The next few hours were a blur of police officers, paramedics, and questions. So many questions. David was taken to the hospital under police guard with a severe concussion. My mom was treated for dehydration and the rope burns on her wrists. And me? I sat in that police station until 3 a.m., telling my story over and over again to different detectives. Detective Martinez, a kind woman in her 50s, was the one who finally helped me understand the full scope of what David had done. "Mrs. Chen," she said gently, "we searched your husband's laptop that we found in your mother's basement. What we discovered, it's extensive." She opened a manila folder and showed me printouts that made my stomach turn. "He's been tracking you for almost 4 years. He had your work schedule, your social media passwords, your daily routines mapped out in spreadsheets. He even had copies of your text messages with friends." "How is that possible?" I whispered. "Spyware on your phone, hidden cameras in your apartment, social engineering. This man is extremely tech-savvy and very patient. He spent months learning everything about you before he ever approached you." She showed me more papers, financial records, fake social media profiles he'd created, even a detailed plan for your wedding. "He chose that venue because he knew you'd mentioned it in a conversation with your college roommate 2 years before you even met him. He was listening to everything, Amber." I felt like I was going to be sick. So nothing about our relationship was real? I'm afraid not. He manufactured every coincidence, every shared interest. Even your first apartment together, he specifically chose that building because he'd been monitoring the tenant list and knew when units would become available. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever felt. The man I'd loved, the man I'd married, the man I'd planned to have children with, none of it had been real. But Detective Martinez wasn't done. "There's something else, Amber. We found evidence that you're not his first victim." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" She pulled out photographs of 2 other women, both brunettes, both around my age, both with similar features to mine. Jessica Walsh disappeared 3 years ago. Sarah Kim went missing 5 years ago.
both had restraining orders against men who fit David's description, but he was using different identities then. I stared at the photos of these two women who looked so much like me, and a horrible thought occurred to me. Are they? We don't know yet, but we're reopening both cases. Your bravery in fighting back may have just helped us solve 2 missing persons cases. The weight of that revelation hit me like a truck. If I hadn't found my mom when I did, if I hadn't fought back, I could have ended up like Jessica and Sarah. Will he go to prison? I asked. With the evidence we have, stalking, kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and now potentially 2 murders, he'll never see the outside of a prison cell again. But even as she said those words, I couldn't shake the fear that had settled into my bones. David had been planning this for years. What if he had backup plans? What if he told other people about me? Over the next few weeks, as David recovered in the hospital before being transferred to jail, more horrifying details emerged. The police found storage units he'd rented under fake names, filled with more photos of me, recordings of my phone calls, even items he'd stolen from my apartment over the years. My favorite coffee mug that I thought I'd lost, a sweater that had mysteriously disappeared from my laundry. Little things that I'd never even noticed were missing. He'd been in my life, invading my privacy for so much longer that I'd realized. The worst part? My friends and family had no idea. To everyone who knew us, David had been the perfect boyfriend, the perfect fiancé, the perfect husband, charming, attentive, clearly devoted to me. How did you know? I asked my mom one day as she recovered at home. She sighed, still looking tired and fragile. It was little things at first. He knew details about your childhood that you'd never shared with him, things that were only in your old diary. He mentioned conversations you'd had with friends before you started dating him. And then she paused, as if deciding whether to tell me something. What, Mom? I saw him leaving your apartment building one day, months before you two officially moved in together. When I asked you about it later, you had no idea he'd been there. The betrayal kept cutting deeper with every revelation. The divorce was complicated. How do you divorce someone who's in jail for stalking and kidnapping? My lawyer, thankfully, was experienced with cases like mine. She helped me understand that David's deception was grounds for annulment. Our marriage could be declared invalid because it was based entirely on fraud. But the legal proceedings were just the beginning of my healing process. I had to completely rebuild my life. I changed my phone number, moved to a new apartment across town, even switched jobs. Every routine David knew about me, I had to change. The hardest part was learning to trust my own judgment again. How could I have been so blind? How could I have loved someone so deeply who was essentially a stranger? My therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, the irony of her last name wasn't lost on me, helped me understand that I wasn't stupid or naive. Predators like David are master manipulators. They study their targets, learn exactly what they want to hear, and become that perfect person. You didn't fall in love with David. You fell in love with a character he created specifically to trap you. It took months of therapy to truly accept that it wasn't my fault, that I hadn't missed obvious red flags, because there weren't any. David had been that good at his deception. The trial was a media circus. Local news stations picked up the story. Bride discovers husband's dark secret days after the wedding. I hated the attention, but I knew my testimony was crucial for putting David away forever. When I took the witness stand and saw him sitting there in his orange jumpsuit, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. This man had wasted years of his life obsessing over someone who didn't even really know him. He'd thrown away any chance at genuine love or happiness for this twisted fantasy. And now he'd spend the rest of his life in prison. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called it one of the most disturbing cases of stalking and premeditated deception she'd ever seen. When they announced the verdict, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. But the real victory came 6 months later when Detective Martinez called me with news about Jessica Walsh and Sarah Tim. She said, "We found them." Simply. Found them? Alive? Alive, David Amber. He'd been holding them in a property he owned upstate under a fake name. They'd been there for years, Amber. I cried harder that day than I had during my entire ordeal. 2 women were alive because I'd been brave enough to fight back. 2 families had their daughters back because I refused to be another victim. Jessica and Sarah both reached out to me eventually. We formed an unlikely support group, 3 women who'd survived the same monster. They helped me understand that healing was possible, that I could learn to trust again, that I could have a real future. It's been 2 years now since my wedding day. 2 years since my mother whispered those words that saved my life. I never did go on that honeymoon to Hawaii. Instead, I took my mom on a mother-daughter trip to Ireland, something we'd always dreamed of doing together. We walked through green hills and ancient castles, drank tea in cozy pubs, and slowly healed together. I'm dating someone new now. His name is Marcus, and he's nothing like David. He's quiet, where David was charming, honest, where David was manipulative. When I told him my story on our 3rd date, expecting him to run away, he simply held my hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me with that." Most importantly, he respects my boundaries. He doesn't push for information I'm not ready to share. He doesn't show up uninvited or try to control my schedule. He's patient with my healing process, and he understands why I sometimes need space. Real love, I've learned,